Welcome back, and we're talking now to Sergeant Dan McKnight, retired. His organization is BringOurTroopsHome.us. Their mission statement says we're an organization composed of veterans of global war on terror and their civilian allies who are dedicated to ending American involvement in our endless wars in the Middle East and to bring our troops home. We insist that the Constitution of the U.S. be respected and enforced, requiring a formal declaration of war by Congress before U.S. military forces are deployed into combat overseas. And we're committed to returning to a foreign policy befitting a limited government republic, one that puts America first. So to achieve these goals, BringOurTroopsHome.us will utilize public education, political action, and legislation, including passing Defend the Guard bills in state houses across the country. So we're going to talk to Dan about what's going on. I want to get a feel for how this has played out so far and the state legislatures that he's been involved in. A couple of weeks ago, I think it was, I mentioned that this was legislation that had been introduced in a couple of different places. And so I want to get a feedback as to how that is going. But first, let's begin. Thank you for joining us, Sergeant McKnight.
You bet, David. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I want to start with this September withdrawal date that's now been moved. It was delayed. You know, President Trump had set a date, and now it has been moved to September 11th. What is your take on that? You wrote an op-ed piece. Give people your take on this, the September withdrawal date for Afghanistan.
Sure. If we actually end the war on September 11th, David, we will praise President Biden, but at the same time, we issue a strong warning. America made a promise through President Trump in the Doha deal that we would leave and end hostilities on May 1st of this year. And by extending it 4 months and 10 days to a ceremonial date of 9/11/21, we feel like it's more poetic, literary repetition than anything. It's political theater. And if one American life is lost from May 1st till September 11th, it's going to rest squarely on President Biden's shoulders. He's going to have to own that. He won't be able to place that blame on anybody else. And we don't feel that conditions are going to get any better between May 1st and September 11th. And so we question why. Why didn't the Biden administration, the day they took office, work to honor America's promise and leave by May 1st?
That's right. And the Taliban has said they've threatened to escalate. There's something of a truce that's going on right now. They said, if you're not out by May 1st, we're going to escalate this. So we know that there's going to be a lot more death just to hold to this ceremonial date. Do you believe that that Biden is sincere about this, or do you think there's going to be something else? Are they hoping, perhaps, by this delay, to have to energize the Taliban to attack and then give them an excuse to continue to that's my conspiracy-minded theory behind this. What do you think about that?
Yeah, there's two trains of thought on that. One is just like you said, that this delay is designed to entice further action so that we can continue to stay in Afghanistan, as Liz Cheney and Lindsey Graham would say, forever.
Yep.
I don't know if that's necessarily true or not, but I think it's a very realistic possibility. The other option is like Maureen Dowd just had a great op-ed last week, who I don't agree with very often with Maureen Dowd, but she said that President Biden is finally turning his back and thumbing his nose at the generals that have cast us into forever war. And if that's the case, if he's actually finally going to ignore those 3- and 4-star generals that are political appointees that are nothing more than mouthpieces of the military-industrial complex, and he is going to turn his back on them and end this war on September 11th, I'll praise him and I will honor him as a president of peace. I don't believe that that's actually going to happen. I think we're going to stay there indefinitely, and September 11th will just be another day ticked off on a calendar, 20 years of war, 3 generations now fighting in the same war, and it'll perpetuate on and on and on because that's what the military-industrial complex wants.
I absolutely agree. As a matter of fact, when I covered the story of what you were doing along with Bolton, I think it's John Bolton, I've talked to Michael Meharry, both of them from the 10th Amendment Center, but I think it was John Bolton who was talking about what was going on in the committees, and I want to talk about what's going on in some state-by-state levels. But the whole reason that you started your organization was because of some conversations that you had with people like Liz Cheney. Tell the audience about that. In terms of
we started our organization in January of 2009 when our senator from Idaho, Senator Jim Risch, a Republican, who was the governor and commander-in-chief of the National Guard when I was in Afghanistan, he was elevated to the position of chairman of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. And I thought, hey, I'm from a small state. I'm a veteran. I have a relationship with Senator Risch. I'm going to call him and ask him to use his position to end the forever wars. He's the second most powerful man in foreign policy in the entire country at the time. And I wrote an op-ed that was picked up by 9 newspapers around the state. And then Jim Risch came to town to speak at a Chamber of Commerce event. And I hired a cameraman to follow me there. And I asked him publicly what it would take for him to support ending the wars. And he said, Dan, I know you. I remember you. I've read your article and I agree. We're through with nation building. And I thought, my goodness, that was easy. He's going to go back to Washington and be a champion for America First foreign policy. But the guy went back to D.C. and 3 times over the next 90 days voted to extend the wars in Yemen, Afghanistan, and Syria indefinitely. Yeah. So we started this organization of right of center veterans that really, truly honor and love the Constitution, that would answer the bell for our nation anytime we're asked. We just asked that Congress do it the right way. And so we took a group of 100 veterans and state lawmakers back to D.C. Veterans Day week 2 years ago. And we met with all of our congressional delegation. And one of our members met with Liz Cheney and asked her the same question. What would it take for you to support ending the war in Afghanistan? And she said, I can't support that position at all. And he asked her more directly, when will the troops come home from Afghanistan? And she looked him square in the face and said, never. Yeah. And right then we knew it was time to take the fight to the state level and ignore the swamp in D.C.
Yeah, absolutely. No, they have no intention of leaving. As a matter of fact, it was a few years ago. They said, we'll be there for at least another 20 years. And every time Trump would say, well, we're going to leave, they would come back and they would say, you would have somebody from the Joint Chiefs of Staff come out and say, well, no, we're staying. It's like, how do you allow that kind of insubordination? And then you would have Pompeo one time said, yeah, he says stuff like that, but then we take him back and we talk to him and he gets to understand what's really going on, which I think is one of the reasons why he set May the 1st, because he figured he's going to set a date when he's not there. Nobody will stand up to these people. I mean, the military-industrial complex has got an iron grip around our throat, doesn't it?
They do. And if you go to D.C., every giant steel and glass building that surrounds the Capitol complex is defense contractors. And we know that the heiress of the biggest war profiteer fortune and the merchant of death is Liz Cheney. And we know that she is the one that is really, really pushing for this. And the neocons and the warmongers in D.C., they are fed by the blood of the military-industrial complex. And that complex is fed by the blood of American soldiers and treasure from American taxpayers. And it's time for that cycle to stop. And there's one way to do it. There's 2 ways, really. The best way to do it would be for Congress just to reclaim their authority to be the only body authorized to make war. No one should be able to take America from a state of peace to a state of war. The Constitution says it's a body of people, the representatives of the people. And they've abdicated that responsibility since World War II, when they declared war on Hungary, Bulgaria, and Romania. Yeah. And since that time, the executive's been the one that's taken us into war every single time.
That's right. That's right. And this is, I think, one of the big blind spots for Christians. Christians who will fight for innocent life, and yet they worship this warmongering capability in the sense that they turn it into a heroic endeavor when it violates all the Christian principles that we had of a just war. In a just war, you're supposed to, first of all, be attacked, and you're supposed to only conduct war when you are threatened by somebody, and then you do it in a way to try to minimize how long the war is going to last, to try to minimize any civilian casualties to people. That's why in Western civilization we would wear uniforms. You know, the people in the countries that we're fighting, for the most part, don't wear uniforms. They try to blend into the crowd. And so we would identify the combatants with flashy uniforms, and we would try to make the war end. We would have a very definite purpose, and the beginning would only be as something that was defensive. But now we've adopted the tactic of preemptive strikes, which is basically what Pearl Harbor was about. We're not having this constitutional debate about why we should get into a war, and that's something that has been very troubling to me for a very long time. I'm really glad to see that you are pushing back against this, and I like the approach that you're doing, going to the state level. Tell us about that approach. Since you can't get anything in Washington, tell us about the approach that you're focusing on at the state level.
Absolutely. We've worked with groups like the 10th Amendment Center and Concerned Veterans for America and some other veterans groups. We were always looking for a way to make the fight more manageable. We can't fight D.C. And so Pat McGeehan, he's a delegate from West Virginia in the legislature. He proposed this bill, Defend the Guard. And it's in his 5th or 6th year that he's tried to push it. And in a nutshell, what it says is that the National Guard of the state cannot be released into federal service under Title X orders to fight active duty combat unless Congress has first declared war. It's a one-page bill. It's very clean. It's very simple. And it's supported by the military clause of the Constitution and the enumerated powers clause. So Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 is the militia clause. And it says that the militia or the National Guard can be called into federal service to repel an invasion, to put down an insurrection, and to enforce the laws of the Union. And a declaration of war by Congress becomes the law of the Union. That's the justification for being able to take the militia from a domestic defense service into federal combat overseas. And it started in West Virginia. It grew from there. Last year, we got into a dozen states maybe introduced. And this year, we're in 31 states where the bill's been introduced or is in some form of introduction. It's being drafted. And next year, the goal is all 50 states. And it hasn't passed yet, but we're drawing a lot of attention. And every time we show up to testify in favor of the bill at a hearing, we're finding a 1 or 2-star general is showing up to oppose it. So we know we're on the right track. When a retired sergeant from the United States Army National Guard can show up and command an audience of a general, we know that we have somebody's attention.
Well, it's not like they got a shortage of generals. I did a story, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like in World War II, we had 4 or 5 4-star generals, and now we've got something like 40 or 80 of them. I mean, they are top heavy in terms of brass. And so these guys have got, they've got more than enough generals to throw around at this stuff. But I think that's very important, the fact that you as a retired sergeant can get the attention of these generals. But you are getting their attention. Talk about some of the things that these generals have done behind closed doors to try to shut down this legislation.
Sure. The first story would be in West Virginia when Delegate Pat McGeehan brought the bill up the first or second time. The Adjutant General of the West Virginia National Guard, who I believe was also the chairman of the National Guard Adjutant General's Bureau at the time. So he's a general, he's a political appointee, and he's a lobbyist for a national organization, all in the same uniform. He showed up at the Capitol building in his Class A uniform with his ribbons and all of his awards and decorations, much like Colonel Nathan Jessup on A Few Good Men. And he had that moment where he walked in there and he said, "You cannot do this. You need us. You want us on that wall," right? That whole scene played out, and members of the legislature kind of agreed. In West Virginia, in Wyoming, we have 21 co-sponsors of the bill this year. We had a Libertarian, Marshall Burt, Marine Corps veteran. We had a Democrat, Andy Clifford, who was the wife, mother, and daughter of a National Guardsman that had served in the war. And we had a Republican, Ocean Andrews, who was a liberty-minded, kind of a Ron Paulian Republican, and 21 other co-sponsors, 2 of which were running against Liz Cheney in the primary election next year for her congressional seat. Oh. And the day before the bill was supposed to go for a committee hearing, the general invited all the sponsors and co-sponsors of the bill out to the base for a private tour with him as the tour guide, showing him all the shiny tanks, shiny airplanes, and shiny helicopters that this bill would, quote unquote, eliminate from Wyoming. In Wyoming also, Liz Cheney's staff, or Liz Cheney herself, we're not sure which, called members of the legislature and said if they passed Defend the Guard, she would personally see to it that 2 C-130 aircrafts were stripped from their state and sent to Texas. Mm. Well, that's again, we know we're on the right track, but if the cost of saving National Guardsmen from their 6th, 7th, 8th, or 9th deployment to the global war on terror is 2 airplanes, they can keep their airplanes.
That's right. And that's how they do all of this. This is why I was talking earlier about the lockdown and what that was predicated on. Both here as well as even in Canada, it's predicated on showering people with money. Sending $10 billion to the Republican governor of Idaho as part of the executive order declaring a national state of emergency with COVID. That's the way they always get this done, is by throwing money. And with the military-industrial complex, they do this with the politicians, with the military bases. Well, we'll close that military base, or we'll move those 2 planes. I guess the C-130s, as big as they are, I guess they've got a lot of support personnel. I guess it'd be like closing a military base to move 2 of those things. But that's the way that they do it. They bribe us, and we allow them to take away our freedom, to send soldiers to die because of money, because of that bribery. That's the thing that's so reprehensible about this. It's the same thing's happening with us with COVID.
Correct, absolutely. And here in Idaho, when we first introduced the bill, we were working with the Lieutenant Governor Janice McGeehan, who was a great supporter of the bill. She is a liberty patriot through and through. And we said, let's do this the right way. Let's bring the Adjutant General of the National Guard in for a meeting. And General Garshak came in and sat down with us and discussed the bill and said, I agree with the constitutional principles of this bill. You're right. Congress should declare war before any troops deploy. He even went as far as to say that the Constitution doesn't even call for a standing army, which he's right.
Yes.
And he said the National Guard should fight America's wars. And I agree with him completely. If we have to go to war, it should be the citizen soldiers that do it. Yes. But there should be a declaration of war. And then he followed up his statement with but. And everything that comes after the but erases everything before the but, right? So he said, but we would lose funding. We would lose money. And it's my job to advocate for the National Guard. And so he opposed the bill, even though he agreed in principle with it.
Well, love of money is the root of all evil, and it is also the root of everything that the federal government is doing. It's like, we don't go throw out the Constitution because we can have more money if we throw it out. That's basically what he's saying, right?
Correct. And Representative Ben Adams was the bill sponsor, and he stood up and gave a fiery speech on the House floor last week when they returned from their COVID recess. And he said, you cannot continually bribe the American people with their own money.
Yes.
Well, the tree of liberty has to be watered. And if it has to be watered with the blood of tyrants, then so be it.
Yeah, that's right. But that's what they're doing in every aspect and have been doing for a very long time. And that is bribing people to give up their liberty, to give up the Constitution. And that is the central MO of the federal government. And that's why we have to get people at the state level who will not succumb to that kind of bribery and corruption, because that's really what it is. It's just blatant corruption to sell out the Constitution and the rule of law and the lives of soldiers simply for money. So tell us what's happening in some of the other states.
Sure. In Texas, we had a fantastic hearing there. So Texas is the only state in the entire country where the state Republican Party platform specifically states that Republicans in Texas should support Defend the Guard legislation, and the National Guard should not be called into combat without a declaration of war from Congress. And so we held the Republicans on the committee, on the Military Defense Committee. We sent them a copy of their party platform to remind them why they're Republicans. This is a claim. And the party chairman for the state is Alan West, right? A veteran, a kind of a hero for a lot of troops. The night before the hearing, he gave a powerful speech on a radio show and said, if you don't support the party platform, you're not a Republican. Mm-hmm. And so we reminded the Republicans that this is in their party platform. And the Democrats, we showed them evidence and a brilliant write-up from the West Virginia ACLU, not exactly a conservative organization,
right,
supporting Defend the Guard. And so we had all 9 members of the committee with enough ammunition that they could go back to their base and say, look, this is what we should support, and here's why. And we left the hearing, and they postponed the vote, and we just got word last Friday that it died in committee without a vote.
Really?
Without a vote.
Really?
And so now we have to do one more step, right? We've tried pressure. We've tried doing it the political way. And now we have to answer the bell in a way that only politicians understand. And that's the primary season.
Yeah.
And so now we're going to identify people around the country that are the biggest obstructionists to the bill. And we're going to go after them in the primary. And we're going to make them spend money and time that they may not typically have to spend in a primary they've probably never been challenged in before. And we're going to start in places like Idaho with Joe Palmer, who's the chairman of the Transportation and Defense Committee, who voted down the bill when it got a voice vote in the affirmative for the bill. He gabbled out and said that the measure had failed. And when we called for a roll call vote, he refused to do it. So we're going to start with him, and we're going to go around the country and primary the people that have been the biggest obstructionists. And we're going to do it the way that politicians understand, by taking away their power.
That's right. And this is not a single issue thing, because this is really fundamental. This is where the rubber meets the road. If these people are willing to throw away the Constitution because they can get money for the military-industrial complex, and let's make no mistake about it, these unending wars of empire, which is what this is, these unending wars of empire will bankrupt and destroy this country. We will be destroyed for moral reasons as well as for financial reasons for what we continue to do. So this has to stop, and we have to get candidates who are going to stand with the Constitution regardless of what the cost is. And so that is a really key issue. Talk a little bit about the people on the left, because as you pointed out many times, this is coming from people on the right, people who are conservative, America First and so forth, growing up all the people who were anti-war were typically on the left. These people have taken a powder, haven't they? Have you seen any support from Democrats? You mentioned one Democrat co-supporter there in Wyoming, but have you seen any support from Democrats in general? I mean, they used to hang their hat on being anti-war, anti-military industrial complex, but I guess not anymore.
You know what? There are. The left has been correct on anti-war principles for a different reason, right? So this bill, we have a Democratic sponsor in Hawaii. His name's Dale Kobayashi, and he's been a fantastic champion of the bill. And if there's one state in the entire country that you could say must have their National Guard stay at home at all times, it would probably be Hawaii, right? They're the only state that's been attacked by a foreign power.
Yeah.
And he's been a champion of this. And the left has been right on anti-war issues for a long time, but their message has been not well received. I mean, look at me. Look at Pat McGeehan. Look at Ben Adams. Look at our sponsors. Do I look like a counterculturist? Yeah. I still maintain a military bearing. I may have grown a little beard, but I'm not a born on the 4th of July, hate Ashbury, San Francisco, hippie, era of love and peace type of guy. I am anti-war because anybody that's seen war appalls it.
That's right.
But I'm not anti-American defense. I believe that we should defend American interests. Yes. I believe that if my nation called me today, I would be there tomorrow. My uniform may not fit as well as it used to, but I'd be there tomorrow, and I would stand there proud and ready to defend my country. I'm just asking that if I take such a serious oath, a serious stance to my oath to the Constitution, politicians should too. And the left has been right on this, and this is their chance really finally to stand up and say, you know what, we've been right, and the conservative Republicans are coming to our point of view finally. Mm-hmm. And the Republicans, without giving up any ground, can say, sure, we believe that we're now anti-war, but we do it from a constitutional principle. And that's where the message can find common ground. One is just out of a hatred of war, and one is out of a love for the rule of law. And those two are, it's a Venn diagram, and there's a massive crossover. And Ro Khanna and Barbara Lee are two Democrats in Washington, D.C. that have been leading on this cause. They've been great on this. There's others in Democrats on the national scale, but they come across as that anti-American, anti-war, anti-imperialism, anti-empire building, but they do it in such a raw and emotional way that most Americans simply turn it off because we've become hyper militaristic as a society. And if you speak up against the war, you're portrayed as anti-veteran, and that's just not the case.
That's right. Yeah, it's very pro-veteran. And that's the other part of this. It's not just that the conservatives should embrace this because it's about the rule of law and the Constitution, or that liberals should embrace this because they hate war in general. But it's also the love of soldiers that the right is always talking about, thank you for your service and so forth. Well, thank them by not sending them out to die for something you don't even regard as important enough to hold a debate and to hold a vote for.
That's right. That's right. In America, we honor veterans by lighting fireworks at baseball games, by buying a guy that's wearing his uniform a coffee, or letting us board the airplane first, or giving us free fajitas on Veterans Day. You know what? Once upon a time, not too long ago, Veterans Day and Memorial Day, that was enough. Just a simple thank you, maybe a quiet flag ceremony at the Veterans Cemetery. That was enough. And we've become so hyper vigilant. We've wrapped a yellow ribbon around every tree and light pole in town. And the best way to honor us, though, is just to honor and respect the same document that we swear our lives to protect, and then stop making more of us.
That's right. In many ways, it reminds me of all of the flag worship that people get involved in while they completely ignore the Constitution. And I think that really does epitomize what we're seeing here with this. People who really don't care, even as much as they say, if they care about the soldiers, they would want to make sure that you're not going to have any bloodshed unless it is really legitimate. Christians should jump into this because they should be concerned that we don't shed innocent blood or shed blood unnecessarily, that we try to terminate this as quickly as possible. And anybody who cares about the rule of law should care about this. Again, this ought to be a subject that unites us across the board. And I think it's very important because, as you realize, Washington, like it is on so many different issues, is so completely gone that we got to do it at the local level. And I think that's a really important thing, that we start to focus things at the local level. And that's what I really like about your approach. Are there any other states that are ongoing? I mean, you talked about Texas, and how even though it's in the Republican platform, they wouldn't even get it out of committee. Do you see anything else happening in any other states right now?
Yeah, we're still kind of in a holding pattern in Michigan where Steve Johnson, representative up there, brought the bill forward. We had a great hearing. We're waiting for the committee to reconvene and take it up again. But the next big prize that we're really eyeing is Florida, where we've got two bill champions that are phenomenal. Representative Melanie Bell and Representative Anthony Sabatini, who just announced his run. He's going to be running for Congress in the new Florida district. And they are champions of this bill. They speak the language. They've got a great following, a great constituency. And Anthony Sabatini also happens to be a combat and National Guard officer who has combat duty experience.
Yeah,
and so
he's been very good on this COVID lockdown stuff too, as well. Sabatini, I've seen some good.
Very liberty-minded, very much in the Ron Paul mentality, and so that's our next big fight. We think that's going to be the last one of the year, maybe, because the legislatures are so busy taking up arms against their governors and trying to reclaim some authority for the state legislatures that everything else has kind of gone by the wayside. But Nathan Dahm in Oklahoma, this is his second year running it. Stuart Jones in South Carolina, this is his second year. We had a hearing in Maine. We're still waiting for the Maine committee to vote on the introduction of it. So there's a lot of things happening, and I would encourage anybody to go to defendthegard.us, and there's a map that you can click on every state. You can see what's going on. And if you click on it and there's no action in that state, there's a place where you can recommend yourself or a lawmaker to become the champion of that bill in that state. And this takes an army. Right now, there's about 3 or 4 of us that work full time, and we're working across the country, and it's exhausting. It takes a lot of resources, and we're all funded by private donations. So I'd encourage, visit defendthegard.us, find a way to help and join the grassroots army. Go to bringourtroopshome.us and sign up to follow our national efforts. We do we put out a lot of good media, a lot of good press, a lot of things that people can use to forward on their social medias and help build this movement.
Tell me the difference, because I was giving out the bringourtroopshome.us, defendthegard.us. You've also, what's the difference between those two sites?
Yeah, so defendthegard.us is specifically to track the legislation in the different states. Okay. It's dedicated just to that. Bring Our Troops Home is the organization's website, and Defend the Guard is a project of Bring Our Troops Home.
Okay, good.
Bring Our Troops Home is a parent organization where we have veterans ranging from World War II all the way through the global war on terror. And it's a place for veterans to join. We're your people. You're our people. We should all be fighting on the same side here.
Good. Okay. And so they can go to either one of those sites, defendthegard.us or bringourtroopshome.us, to see how they can contribute or volunteer to help you guys, because you point out you're stretched pretty thin, right?
We are. And, I do this full time. My wife runs our business so that I can do this. This is my calling. I feel like it's almost a ministry. Somebody has to defend the Republic. And if we don't do it, it will be lost. Yes.
Very important work. Thank you so much, Sergeant Dan McKnight. Bringourtroopshome.us, defendthegard.us. Thank you so much for what you're doing. We're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back. Stay with us.